Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Clarity in Confusion, Navigating the Party Conference Season. My name is Sam Webber. I'm the External Relations Manager here at Vuelio, and I'm delighted that you've all joined us today. As we go along, please feel free to get in touch with us with your preferred means or to use the chat box on your screen to ask questions directly. We'll answer as many as we can towards the end of the webinar. So today, I am joined by three excellent guests. Let me welcome them. James Baker is a PR and Public Affairs Associate at Brunswick, and he's also a board member of the Tory Reform Group. Katie Roscoe is Head of UK Public Affairs, Helicopters and Civil at Airbus. And Alex Tiley is a former press and comms officer for a Labour MEP, and he's now working in public affairs at the Scouts. Good morning to you all.
Good morning, hello.
Good morning.
So, today we're going to try and cover as much of this agenda as we can to explain the current political context and to try and make some sense of it, and how it's affecting our public affairs and comms roles, and then why party conference is such a great opportunity for people in our sector. Firstly, James, if I can come to you, as well as your day-to-day public affairs role, I'm told you advised Boris Johnson at the beginning of his leadership campaign. So what is your take on that? Keen to hear a bit more about how that went and how things are going, obviously, at the moment for the PM and the government.
Yes, well, it's all rather interesting at the moment and exciting times and all that. But yeah, I advised Boris. I worked on his campaign, specifically the first half of it. So as people remember, there was a stage with MPs and the stage with members. I was involved in the MP stage, so also went up with him to Peterborough during the by-election, which you'll remember Labour managed to hold on to over there. But we filmed his campaign video and produced that together. And then I advised him on his LGBT and women and equalities policies, a lot of which you're still seeing now trickling through in some of these announcements coming down the line. And actually some which still they haven't done much of, but that are going to be coming down as we head to an election, I think. But so if you look at some of the work he's done, writing to the LGBT Conservatives, writing to Women to Win, and some of those Conservative membership groups, you can see actually, and it's worth people looking at some of those letters, at some of his policies that we hope to see should we go into an election in the coming months. Okay.
And with the Tory Reform Group sort of hat on, obviously that he made a big sort of pitch to that wing of the party to ensure that he won the election, and obviously perhaps is now getting a bit of criticism for how things are going from that wing of the party, perhaps following recent events last week. But do you think things will settle down, or how do you think things will play with the party sort of discipline, as it were, at the moment?
I think it's really interesting. I think you'll see all sorts of different things happening. I mean, Number 10 has been quite firm in that they don't want to let everyone back in. I think that would be a shame. It would be great to have some of those people back in. It's interesting, and don't forget that there are a lot of people who are standing down themselves. So Justin Greening, Alistair Burt, Nicholas Soames, Ken Clarke are all standing down. So do you necessarily need to restore the whip to them? The bigger question is what happens to the David Gauks and Miltons, Rory Stewarts, people who want to keep standing in their seats. And those are people that hopefully will get the whip restored. But, keep an eye on those people and keep an eye on what is said about people like Steve Bryan, seats in Winchester, seats that actually are really hard fought. And when there's a Lib Dem resurgence, you want to have people like Anne Milton in Guildford and Steve Bryan in Winchester and Stephen Hammond in Wimbledon, because those are the sorts of incumbency factors that actually are really helpful to Conservatives in an election.
Okay, no, that's a good point. Obviously, with the election looming, even though we don't quite know now when it'll be, and obviously it's looking like November or even December, I think, following last night's vote, not going the way of the government, not getting the 2/3. Can I come to Katie? Can I come to you about how you and other colleagues are able to work in these sort of fast-moving times that James has highlighted? We've had resignations, we've got policy changes, a looming election, Brexit, shadowing everything. How are you able to prepare and do your job in these times?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. It's tricky with a lack of certainty. I'm sure lots of people will sympathise with the fact that best laid plans and all that it's difficult to plan beyond the week at the moment, and getting any time with any MPs, and especially getting them out of Westminster or out of their constituency, is really difficult. Things like getting to know your new ministers when they are moving on very quickly is tricky. I think the key thing for me, with all of that in mind, is such a state of flux, is that focus on the relationships that you know that you have already and continue to build on those. So if you, like Airbus, have a number of facilities, make sure that you have those great local connections. Most people will still be around if there is an election, although I know there will be a lot of change potentially in the next weeks and months.
Yes.
I think there's getting to know PPSs, people that are supporting ministers, the other people that are backbenchers that you think are potential future ministers, gives you that kind of group of supportive and friendly people in Parliament when times are less certain. And I think it's a long-term relationship.
And do you think is it very much that the machinery of government will continue with those PPSs and the ministers working in Westminster over the coming 5 weeks, with the exception of their own conferences? Just the MPs away, or?
No, I don't think they will. So, I mean, for me personally, it's spending time with the officials, who are the people that will be still cranking the wheels and making policy happen over the next few weeks. So if there is anything that's more urgent, getting in to see officials in the department is important, having that relationship, because they're the constant thing throughout politics. I think it's really tricky at the moment, and I'm actually at a trade show this week, and ministers and MPs are dropping out and changing their plans very last minute, so it's very difficult to plan. So at the moment I would say you've got to just do your best, hope for the best, and assume everything will change on the day. Focus on some of those backroom people and officials.
Right. And coming to you, Alex, how are you finding things? Are you finding colleagues are sort of asking how this is changing and what the impact is for you in your public affairs role at the Scouts?
Well, I mean, candidly, I think it's a nightmare, to be honest. Traditionally, I think, as an organisation, and I think this is the case for a lot of organisations, that maybe we don't have particularly large public affairs teams or very much capacity. We've always engaged in more high-level advocacy around key areas like the spending review, and you found that a lot of things the government was planning on doing and a lot of funding commitments that they were hoping to make, that maybe we'd been engaging in a lot of work around, get a little bit kicked into the long grass, and you have a change of administration basically, and you're not confident that anything that you've really worked quite hard for over the past year is actually going to come to any fruition. And so it's been a bit of a priority for us to actually start to, I think I'd echo what Katie said, like try and engage a lot more with some more permanent but less high-profile people, and try just to really make sure that we still have groups of people that we can consider to be allies in Westminster. I think that in general, the way that the ministers have changed, it's always a priority as an organisation. Everyone thinks, we will have to go and write to a minister immediately to welcome them to the post. Well, you and every other public affairs person, every other organisation. So you're not necessarily going to hear back particularly quickly or get any of the cut through that you're looking for. And so it's a struggle, I'd say, definitely.
And you mentioned sorry, carry on.
Just an example. We've got trying to organise a sort of main launch, one of our community impact projects, and we want to do it as a political stakeholder event. And people are coming to me, and I'm looking at the amount of money that we're looking at investing in organising this sort of thing, when you could have a general election in 2 months, and suddenly half of the MPs that turned up aren't MPs anymore, and you have to make a call at some point whether you think that's a worthwhile use of time and resources. And at the minute, I think this is something that maybe a lot of agencies also feel, is that a lot of in-house people are deciding that they just don't want to spend the money when they don't have the confidence that it's a good investment.
Yes, because there's so many moving parts, and as you say, yes, so many people potentially would move and perhaps not come back in a new parliament after the election. I mean, the spending round last week, I suppose all three of you would have followed it, but I mean, normally that would be a huge sort of set-piece Westminster event, and I think it probably got a bit lost with all the chaos and resignations last week. So I mean, was it useful? Was it a helpful spending round? Obviously it was designed to be a pre-election spending round, but did you find it was helpful from your perspective, Alex?
Well, as far as what the government promised, there were some things in there which we were happy to see. It compared to what I would say what it would have looked like if there'd been a proper spending review. It was a very paltry example of, it was a very minor thing compared to sort of what we had been talking about and what certainly our conversations with DCMS and DFE were indicating that we could get. So I think that's the case for everything, because even I think a government would be quite leery at committing a large amount of money to a large project when who knows what even the political future of the UK is looking like at the minute. Okay.
Yes, of course. So let me come on, if I may, to the conferences themselves. I think all three of you have attended in over many years in different roles, perhaps the different conferences themselves of the main parties. I'm keen to ensure listeners get the most out of attending them. They might be attending only for a day or so, and they may be attending them for the first time. How would you say, perhaps I'll come to you, Katie, on this, how would you say that people should get the best out of the party conference experience, if they're only attending on a budget for a short period perhaps, or only attending one?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think it does come down to individuals. So different people like to do things in different ways. Some people get a lot of value out of attending lots of fringes, and others like to hang out at the hotel bar and see who they bump into. I would say a bit of both probably works. Know what you're going to, look through the guide, figure out what is going to be most relevant for you. And actually, in the fringes of the fringe meetings, that's where you will meet others that are potentially useful to you before and after having a chat and perhaps a cup of coffee. So I think it's never wasted. But I do think kind of mooching around, and if you've got any targets, particularly for some of the smaller parties like the Lib Dems, where it's more of a concentrated space, you've got more chance of bumping into people. I tend to think that works quite well. Airbus sponsors receptions, obviously that gets more people along to things, but I think it's I think the one thing I would say is don't count the value of the conference you go to on the number of meetings you've got in the diary with MPs before you go, because that is likely to change when you're there, and it's likely that you can see them in Westminster. So think about what is different about being at a conference.
Yes. Okay. No, that's useful. James, can I come to you, perhaps, with the fringe mentioned there by Katie?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you think people can get the most out of conference from the fringe? Are there particular events they should be looking out for by different organisations?
Yeah, and I think the fringe is really important, especially at the Conservatives, because of course you've got the government agenda in the main hall, and it's great to go see some of those people speak. Liz Truss is always good fun doing international trade. It's worth seeing Nicky Morgan, Sajid Javid might be worth going to see as well. But ultimately, the fringe is really interesting because not only do you get MPs speak on panels, you can be a bit more frank, you also get to hear from people, you get to hear lots of different things. The sort of the think tank that I'd say to people it's worth visiting is the Adam Smith Institute. They're the guys who are the sort of free market libertarian champions who, whether you agree with them politically or not, they've got a lot of people who've recently gone into Number 10, and a lot of their staff have become special advisors. And they champion the free ports policy, which is now government policy. So if you want to see what's coming up next or other ideas that might be working their way through the government, the Adam Smith Institute is the place to go. At the same time, it's also worth, we sort of talked about the wings of the party, it's worth keeping an eye on what the Tory Reform Group are doing. And I would say that, of course, being on the board, but they have some interesting campaigning events, and a lot of their patrons still speak. And there's also, other groups, so Bright Blue, which is a sort of liberal conservative think tank, and Policy Exchange also have a really good program. But the real thing that I would suggest people do go to is the Conservative Home, Con Home, which I'm sure listeners will know is a website mainly for conservative activists. Con Home's brilliant. It's run by Paul Goodman and edited by Mark Wallace, and Paul always has the best events at conference with lots of different speakers from across the party, and not only that, but lots of people go, so councillors, candidates. So Con Home normally has a tent, and it's worth for people popping in just to see it, and also really to get an insight into the conservative associations and some of the membership and the discussions they're having up and down the country.
Okay, and obviously this particular conference will have a sort of pre-election air to it, I guess, because of where we are. I mean, we don't know when there will be an election, but as others have hinted, it's certainly in the offing this side of Christmas, we suspect. How do you think that will play out in terms of conference, knowing there's an election coming?
I think we'll see what we saw with the spending review, which are big announcements and big ambitions. We will see more money for police, we'll see more money for schools, we'll see more money from the NHS, and I think each cabinet member's speech will be intended to be a pre-election. This is what we want to do. This is how we want to deliver for the country. And don't forget that Boris hasn't done a conference before, so his speech on the Wednesday morning will be absolutely key for everyone to watch. I would just say to people, if you think it's tricky queuing for hours on end, then don't go see Boris, watch it on TV. I've always gone to see the speeches, but even for Theresa May, you had to queue up for about 2 hours. With Boris, I think people will be queuing, well, not quite overnight, but they'll be queuing much longer. And given that it's his, these are Conservative members, they'll be wanting to see him. A lot of people won't have seen him speak, live before. So that speech on the Wednesday morning will be really key as he sets out his sort of election manifesto and makes a case to the country about why it needs to be a Conservative government and why he wants to have this election. So, that is the big thing. And actually, he hasn't done a conference speech since he did his sort of fringe event last year, when he famously did something as a sort of alternative to Theresa's the day before. So, the Wednesday morning is a big thing to watch, but it might be easy for people to watch that on BBC News or go see it in the Great Hall, because it really is an amazing sight when you see all the members and all the kind of buzz of that.
Yes, and he'll be tearing up the rule book about how you sort of present as a Prime Minister, isn't he? He's already doing that, isn't he, in terms of moving the microphone onto the dispatch.
It will be something to remember, I'm sure. Yeah, and you never know what's going to come out. They always, last year we had Theresa May doing her Dancing Queen. The year before that it was the coughing and all of the letters falling off. You just don't know what's going to happen with these speeches, and there's so much media scrutiny. And this is a very different Number 10. It's a very savvy team, and they will, I'm sure, have something lined up that'll be interesting.
Okay. Let me come to Alex, if I may, about Labour, with Labour conference in the offing, and perhaps a Corbyn government only weeks away. How do you think Labour conference will go, Alex? Any particular words of wisdom there for listeners?
Well, so one of the most unique things about Labour conference, I think, that maybe distinguishes it from Conservative is that is one of the places that policy is actually can be made at conference in the hall. I wouldn't advise anyone in public affairs to go into the hall at conference, because I would never find the time that I was spending there to be particularly illuminating. And a lot of people take the stand and have various opinions, and then mostly, because of the Labour Party, the conference floor is a sort of a grassroots policy-making forum. You have a lot of representatives from CLPs presenting things. I know there is one contact of mine is actually presenting a mental health strategy for young men conference, which I believe has actually got quite a lot of considerable momentum behind it and quite a few MPs backing it. So it might be interesting to have a look at that. It's called the Caerphilly strategy. And other things that go on at Labour conference is a lot of procedural and rulebook-based things, which only really relate to if you're a party member or you're particularly factional within the party, and they're normally various warring factions indirectly arguing with each other on the conference floor, and normally disagreeing with the Conference Arrangements Committee, which is the body which oversees how conference runs and the order and how things are pocketed together and the motions. I think you can probably hope to see some procedural things. Just thinking maybe about the future of the Labour Party and the leadership of the Labour Party, some procedural things tabled by some supporters of Jeremy, which will probably reducing the threshold of nominations that someone would need to get on the leadership ballot, and you're also probably looking at increasing the threshold of no confidence in the leader in order to trigger a leadership election. I think as some of the colleagues.
And presumably a Brexit motion or several Brexit policy motions ahead of this impending election.
Yeah, there was one last year. I understand that GMB's had some interest in sort of quite a lot of activity around that as well. Ultimately, anything at conference gets decided on whether Unite the Union decides to back it, as they have out of all because union delegates also sit on the floor, and they more or less are able to be the power broker and have a union sort of block vote that they decide. So as far as fringes, I'd definitely say probably worth seeing what Unite the Union are saying. They often have some of the most high profile MPs as well, so John McDonnell and people. Yeah.
Cool. Let me come back to Katie. Katie, if someone in public affairs wanted to perhaps, as you suggested earlier, speak to an advisor or indeed a minister, shadow minister at a fringe or in the bar, how do you think they should go about that? Are there any sort of particular do's and don'ts about how they should get involved and make those contacts?
Yeah. Well, I guess the obvious way is just to do the thing that most people do at the end, just to sort of queue up to say your hello to a minister as they're leaving a session. That's often not the best way to get any time. But if you sort of clock who they are walking into the room with, if you're there early enough, you can often, if you don't know their advisors or the people that work in their offices by face or by name, you can normally work out who is with them, supporting them that day. So always worth catching them if they can hang around afterwards. I think it's really up to people's different ways of doing it. Some people are much more comfortable bowling up to somebody and being quite open, and others it's sort of a bit more subtle. I think it's just whatever your style is. The thing the thing that I don't personally like, and I wouldn't necessarily advocate, is kind of going straight in with a card and with a hard message. I mean, if you've got 1 minute, you think, and you need to get something across, then fine. But I don't think that ever really goes across too well. It's not very, people aren't that inclined to warm to you if you're sort of holding a card out and giving your elevator pitch within 2 seconds. So I think it's down to personal style. But I also think sort of be a bit brave. Conference is the time to sort of take the risk and have a chat to people, but often people are grabbing a coffee or a drink at different times of the day and have some time to have those more informal chats, and I think that is a bit better than kind of almost doorstepping them.
Yes. Okay.
I do think that this year with Conservative and the Labour Party, there will be fewer MPs present than normal, because they'll either be in kind of election mode already and want to be in their own constituencies, or I think Labour is just quite divided at the moment, and so there are a lot of Labour MPs that are not in the Jeremy Corbyn camp that just won't go to conference. So think about who your other people are that you might want to get to know at conference if you're going to go.
Okay. And Airbus, I think I understand have a pod in the innovation zone. So obviously it's worth pointing out to people the exhibition spaces at these conferences are also
yes.
worth a look.
Yes. Anybody is welcome to stop by and see us. So we've got a pod that is talking about some of our space and civil aerospace products. So we've got some virtual reality that should be fun if you need to come and have a cup of tea and 10 minutes out of.
And that's a Conservative conference.
That's at the Conservative conference, yeah.
Okay. James, I think you wanted to come in there?
Well, just really to agree on that last point, actually, I certainly at the Conservatives, you'll see probably 22 less MPs than you would normally have done last year, but also To Kate's point, actually, a lot of MPs I know for a fact, they're expected to pay for it themselves. It's often quite an expensive cost for MPs, so a few do choose to stay in their constituencies, and she's absolutely right. If there is an election, people will rather be focusing on their marginal seats. Having said that, though, it's still quite a large government, so you never know. But don't go there hoping to see too many, but use a fringe guide, although bear in mind that sometimes people say X MP is invited, but they never are invited or they don't turn up. So you'll expect to see more government ministers than you would backbenchers.
Okay. And any other particular advice in terms of the day-to-day sort of mechanics of conference? Often you might spend all day on the hoof from early in the morning till very late at night. In terms of how people should get the most out of that time and make sure their phone is still running all the time as well.
I think little things like bring a phone charging pack with you. It's such a simple, such a silly thing, but you'll be on your phone all day. Download the conference app. It's normally quite a good idea. The best advice I can make is actually there's some fantastic restaurants around outside the conference area. In Manchester, the Conservatives are. I'm sure it's the same with the Lib Dems and Labour. Actually, go out to the secure zone and go have a lunch with either some colleagues or a client or a new biz contact, and have even an hour and a half outside of all the madness just to sort of recharge your batteries, and then go back in the afternoon.
Okay, that sounds very good advice. And in terms of booking in meetings, perhaps I'll come to you, Alex, on this. In terms of booking in meetings, they often, is it fair to say, get moved around? So obviously, pointing out the obvious, best to get mobile numbers and contacts for everybody to pin them down once you're there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And if you as it's so busy, then be able to find somewhere to sit down, especially if you're in the secure zone. I mean, the conference bar at lunchtime, don't think you'll be able to sit down and have a leisurely lunch meeting in there unless you sort of very, very well prepared. You've staked out the seat for most of the morning. I can recall one of my old bosses asked me to schedule a meeting with I think an Israeli MP, which has just arrived on a plane, and I was in Liverpool outside with a phone that had 2% battery and no signal outside the Liverpool Echo. So maybe even have more than one phone. If you have a work phone and a personal phone and a power charger, I think they're all definite things you need to keep with you. I never got the meeting sorted, so
still wandering around Liverpool somewhere looking for you.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, fantastic. Right. So also worth highlighting that we have an event. Vuelio has an event run by Prospect at Conservative Conference on Monday, the 30th of September. You're seeing on your screen, 12:45 to 2 p.m. And we're in Central 6 in Manchester Central. So we've got some big name speakers for that, and look forward to seeing anyone who's at Conservative Conference at our event there. And you can see more information about that online on Twitter as well. Fantastic. Right. Thank you very much. I want to thank all of our listeners and especially all of our guests today that have taken part. So thank you very much to James Baker, to Katie Roscoe for dialing in, and to Alex Tiley. Thank you very much, and thank you for listening.